Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and this episode is brought by Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right to all the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads. While the games are being played, when the game's over, head over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here. All right. So if anybody listens to this show, uh, I've been very clear in the past on this podcast that I like to separate previews and reviews, or previews and recaps, I guess is a better way to say that. Previews and recaps and that sort of thing, and sort of like separate all these things out. And unfortunately, too much is happening over the All-Star break in order to be able for us to properly do that. If it was up to me in an ideal world, uh, our podcast would put out a uh, preview. Well, we would have covered the Yankee series and left it there. And then we would have came out and done a preview of the home run derby, done a recap of the home run derby, especially since Orioles are participating in both of these events, and then done a preview of the All-Star game, and then a recap of the All-Star game, and then a preview of the draft perhaps a few days ago, and then a recap of the draft in a few days. But unfortunately, it is too much for our capacity at this point. We also don't tend to put out, two podcasts per day, which is basically what would have been required for a few days. So unfortunately, I had to sort of suffer the consequences of not being able to do all these previews and recaps sort of in the way that I would have wanted to do. We have talked about this on the show before, and I like clearly sort of delineating the topics in sort of the episodes that we talk about, even though the topics are related and this sort of thing. But so, yeah, there's sort of a lot to cover from an Orioles perspective that have happened the last few days that we have not gotten on here to talk about exactly. So I am going to do that here. We had a big series with the Yankees where a lot happened, and it was it was a very quiet series, and we were just, the offense was absent again. This was like a topic of Tyler's last episode, how the offense has been struggling. The offense sort of continued that in this series against the Yankees, but then fireworks went off maybe fireworks isn't a great description of it, but yeah, just a wild, wild ninth inning in game three that I'll get to. But I'm gonna work backwards here. So I'm recording on Tuesday, July 16th. The episode should come out soon after I record. And so I'm recording in advance of the All-Star game, but after the home run derby sort of has concluded. And the one thing, so we had Gunnar Henderson. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the home run derby first and sort of work backwards, and then talk about the Yankee series and what came out of that. So, yeah, so last night, Gunnar Henderson was the lone Orioles representative in the home run derby. Uh, maybe it wasn't appropriate to put lone in there because it is more than common for teams to send one representative to the home run derby. I actually don't know if there have ever been two players on the same team that have participated in the home run derby. That would be an interesting fact to look up. But I also they might have a rule against that. I'm not positive. But anyway, yeah, so Gunnar Henderson was one of eight competitors that came out to the home run derby and participated, hoping to, of course, win. And unfortunately, Teoscar Hernandez was the person who did walk away with the trophy. And in advance, I did think that Gunnar was going to have a good performance. I thought he would do well. But I sort of have texts where I sort of thought Hernandez, um, I guess he was sort of my pick to win, even though I didn't put that on paper. I didn't do the MLB.com entry thing where you make predictions about what happens or anything like that. But I did feel like Teoscar Hernandez had a good chance. But it was interesting because, right after Teoscar Hernandez hit in the first round, it looked like there was a very good chance he was going out and was going to have an early exit uh from uh from the home run derby, and he didn't. And but anyway, and then he hung around, he was able to advance out of the first round, and then he ended up winning. So yeah, I feel like after his at bats probably wasn't feeling very good after the first round, but he escaped through and then he won. So Gunnar Henderson. So in very Gunnar Henderson style, I feel like this very well fits his character. He showed up with a Scooby-Doo bat. I guess Scooby-Doo, I don't know, but I'm assuming that it's got to be among his favorite TV shows. He even did a imitation, or is imitation the right word? An impression, I guess, of one of the characters, I guess, on Scooby-Doo. Uh, like during I guess he was interviewed by MLB Network, or not MLB Network, I guess Fox, who was holding the home run derby. And he did like an imitation or impression of Scooby-Doo. And unfortunately, so it was cool that, he sort of, I think it's cool that he sort of shows a little bit about himself to the fans. And I feel like he has made sort of a deliberate effort to do that throughout his time in Major League Baseball, in sort of more or less innocuous, or sort of ways that definitely will capture people's attention, but is more discreet than him just coming out and making a statement and saying something. So yeah, it was pretty cool he did that. Now, if I was gonna provide a critique, I would have wished he would have picked probably a different show than Scooby-Doo. I know that I saw a few. I mean, I think I guess I can't speak to how much I enjoyed the show as a kid, but there are definitely shows that I would endorse before that one. But if he likes it, that's cool and that's good. So, yeah, glad he was able to show something about himself. Unfortunately, on the field for the home run derby, he didn't do very well. He went out after the first round. He hit the least amount of home runs, one below Pete Alonso, who had 12, and he had 11 home runs during the time. And I think Eli sent a tweet out about this. Now, sometimes after sort of, most of the guys during their 3 minute sections end up taking a timeout around the minute and a half mark, halfway through, just to get a breather and get ready for the second half. And he did that, and Eli sent a tweet out that, it's not looking and feeling great after the first timeout. And sometimes guys get into the rhythm after that timeout. And but he never really did. He did have 11 home runs, so I guess that was enjoyable to a lot of the fans, but it was sort of disappointing. I did come into the event thinking that he could make some noise. Fatigue definitely is a factor in a tournament like this, especially now that they have put timers on the hitters. It used to be where there was no timer and you would just have 10 outs, and that would allow the hitters to take pitches and get take some deep breaths and find and select the pitches they wanted to try to hit. and that is not available to hitters in the new format. So you sort of feel like the you know, Gunnar Henderson's youth could play to his advantage potentially. But yeah, he didn't do very well. And you also just feel like, I mean, we've all seen the ball just jump off Gunnar Henderson's bat, so we had a good feeling that he could, or I had a good feeling at least that he could do something. I wouldn't have thought he would have won it, but I felt like, he would have maybe made the semifinals or made the finals potentially. But it was not meant to be this time. Potentially nerves played a role, but it could be really anything that gets in the way. And it's not like you have a few at bats, even. It's not like these guys go up there for 1 minute and then do that three times to constitute their 3 minutes. And then the second and third time, he could potentially feel it a little more, something's different, and he can start to establish himself a little bit better. But so it sort of feels like, when the home run derby happens, especially in the first round, after you're out in the first round, it sort of feels like it went so quickly. 3 minutes goes by fast. I'm sure he's feeling nerves and pressure to do well. So it was not meant to be for him this time. I would imagine he will be back in another home run derby in the future. But it was a little not upsetting and not even disappointing, because to be disappointing, that would mean you, I guess, have to have real expectations for him to do really well. And this ultimately is a fun contest. Um, and it's not a hyper competitive thing. And Gunnar Henderson has more home runs than Teoscar Hernandez does on the year. So this home run derby isn't even like an assessment of somebody's power. It's just even in normal games, it sort of is a very unique sort of skill set. Sort of reminds me a little bit of like penalty kicks. Obviously, there's stakes in penalty kicks in soccer. The home run derby is sort of like that, but they're not really that big stakes here. So, congratulations to Teoscar Hernandez for winning, and we look forward to seeing Gunnar Henderson tonight in the All Star game. So yeah, we will start with game three, and then we'll talk about what happened in game two of the Yankee series. So in game three, the Orioles did end up pulling out. They somehow pulled out you know, I don't know, pulled off some sort of magic in game three to win. The Orioles had a 3-2 lead going into going into the top of the ninth. Craig Kimbrell came on to try to close out the save, and he blew the save. He gave up a 3-run home run to Rice, who turned out, yeah, gave up a 3-run home run. The Yankees took the lead at that time, 4-2. Kimbrel obviously, was not happy. That was obvious. And yeah, it was a tough outing for him, to say the least. And then it sort of felt at that point like the Orioles were just going to get swept at home by this miserable Yankees team. And I say miserable not because of their record, but because of how they have been doing currently. And it looked like the Orioles were going to get swept at home heading into the All-Star break. That would have been rather annoying and upsetting. And it would have been, yeah, just frustrating overall. But it was not meant to be. The Orioles uh, did make some noise in the bottom of the ninth, put guys on base, but the Orioles were extremely benefited from two defensive mistakes. One in the box score will go down as an error, and then the other one, for anybody who was watching, I mean, it might as well have been an error, even though it wasn't scored that way. But the Orioles had the bases loaded with 2 outs, and ground ball was hit to shortstop, I think by Mountcastle. Anthony Volpe at shortstop mishandled the ball, kicked the ball. That would have been the third out. That would have won the game for the Yankees and would have completed their sweep. But he did not make the play. And then Cedric Mullins came up. He had come in earlier in the game as a pinch runner, I think for Santander, running at third base. The Orioles at that point were just trying to trying to get some insurance run, and the pinch running didn't actually work out earlier in the game because Cedric Mullins was on third with 1 out, was running on contact, got thrown out at home. I, I mean, I'd have to, I guess, see more of the details of it. Not sure exactly if it made sense for him to be running on contact in that situation. But regardless, uh, so he came up with the bases loaded and 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth, and he hit a ball to left field that seemed like it should have probably been routine for Alex Verdugo out and left. But it was not. He misread the ball completely. He started coming in, and then he slipped trying to retreat. Even if he didn't slip, I don't think he would have made the play. I think it was too far over his head at that point, anyways. But yeah. So the Orioles, yeah, as I said, sort of pull off some magic and escape with that victory. Now, what I will say about that game is that so in terms of the standings, I think the standings is where this is the most consequential for the Orioles, right? So the Orioles leave the series and go into the All-Star break up a game on the Yankees. If the Orioles had lost the game, they would have been down a game to the Yankees. And I think that is the most significant implication beyond anything else of that game going in the Orioles' direction. I say that because after that game, we head straight into the All Star break. And I think things kind of reset for both teams. Now, if the Orioles had had that game and then the Yankees had to, I don't know, travel to Houston or something like that, that would sort of be a different situation where the negative momentum of the Yankees and that game and the frustration of losing that game, I think could have had more carryover effect. But I really do think, but vice versa, maybe the Orioles sort of can get out and emerge out of their current, especially offensive frustrations, but the Orioles have not been playing great either. So maybe that win could have catapulted them, gave them a little bit more life in the following games. But I think the All-Star break really sort of deads the momentum in either direction that that victory for the Orioles brings. I think by the time they start playing again, both teams will have sort of moved on and forgotten about it. A lot of the players will have been home to have seen their families and gotten a few days rest. And of course, both players for the teams that were participating in the home run derby and the um, All-Star game, will sort of have a reset through the experience of that anyway. So I don't think it has any dramatic sort of implications long term, but I mean, this could be a race that goes really down to the wire. And the Orioles winning that head-to-head matchup against the Yankees in that game, I think will be the most significant implications of that game. So, uh, yeah, so we'll see what happens. I mean, if the Yankees, I will say, I think there is a possibility it sort of goes down to the wire at the end. If the Yankees continue to implode on their current trajectory, it won't go down to the wire, and the Orioles will run away with the division. But I think that game could have serious potential implications for the standings down the road. So I think that is favorable for the Orioles, and that in of itself is a really important reason why the Orioles needed to win that game, putting momentum aside. And then, like I said, I don't think there will be any real momentum effects from that game. So going back to game two of that series, this was sort of a really unfortunate situation for both teams. But I guess I think it's fair to say, particularly, it was unfortunate for the Orioles. It was Clay Holmes was on trying to preserve a 4-1 lead for the Yankees, and Heston Kjerstad was up. And after a couple quick strikes, uh, Clay Holmes threw a fastball that hit Heston Kjerstad in the head. It was a really scary moment. It hit him pretty well. It hit his helmet. It like hit his like sort of in the equivalent of the ear area, or that sort of ear flap that protects the ear of the for the helmets. And yeah, definitely a really scary moment. Heston Kjerstad could not get out of the way. He went straight to the ground. A quick concussion protocol was done, but Heston Kjerstad was put on the concussion protocol, the IL. The 7-day IL, and for concussions, and it was a really really scary moment, as I said. Now, what are so and of course after that moment, sorry, I gotta continue the story here. So after he went to the ground, it sort of seemed like Clay Holmes was sort of walking in towards Heston Kjerstad, and was sort of trying to make sure he was okay, it seemed like. And Brandon Hyde, I think rightfully so, was really upset and really angry in the moment. And he he cursed at Clay Holmes and told him, trying to not let him come in any further, and wanted to sort of send a message to like stay away, like stay away. We're not trying to um, have you around at the moment. You just potentially uh, jeopardized a player's career, even though it was unintentional. Uh, I think it's pretty fair to assume it was unintentional. But regardless, you sort of jeopardized our player's career. He's on the ground. That this is not the moment for you to necessarily be involved. And although I appreciate the sentiment by Clay Holmes, and he didn't do anything wrong. It's just sort of a situation where you know uh we just sort of don't want you around. And after Brandon Hyde cursed at Clay Holmes, the Yankees dugout took exception to that. Brandon Hyde started yelling back and forth with the Yankees dugout, and there was sort of a brawl on the field. The bullpen's emptied. Everybody came onto the field. A few players were really, really shouting at each other. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries that came out of that brawl. Of course, the Heston Kjerstad injury I would qualify as serious, even just going on the IL. So uh, yeah, but in the brawl, fortunately, nobody was really injured. Now, even thinking about this, my sort of feeling is that, I mean, I do, surprise, surprise, I'm going to take an Orioles. I'm going to sort of be on the Orioles side here of this situation. But I sort of do think, like, yes, I don't think anything was wrong for Clay Holmes to sort of start walking in and start checking on Heston Kjerstad. I don't think anything was wrong with that. And just for a little context too, The Orioles have been hit 10 times this year by Yankee pitchers. So this has obviously been a source of frustration. Now, Yankee fans will probably turn around and say, okay, well, we've only been hit 3 times, but you did hit Aaron Judge, on the wrist, in the wrist area. And, Aaron Judge is worth 10 players by himself, right? So, obviously, I'm sort of joking, and I disagree with that, of course, that assessment, of course. Um, there is, I mean, I think it is sort of unfortunate in baseball that, not all players are sort of valued the same. So yes, I did not want Aaron Judge to get hurt. I like Aaron Judge as a player. He seems like an interesting enough guy. I've seen some interviews and stuff like that with him. He seems interesting enough. But with that said, any batter who steps into the batter's box is at some risk of being hit, being injured, and what the Orioles did, I think it was Suarez who hit him. It was not intentional. It was sort of in the wrist area. I mean, it wasn't a serious injury, even if it did take him out of the game, so it's serious in that sense. But it's it's not something that might cause brain damage, or it's not going to be something that affects his long-term health and well-being as a player. And a lot of players, unfortunately, this is, an unfortunate thing about baseball, a lot of players end up getting hit in that wrist area. And not to blame Judge for this, not at all, but a lot of guys will get their hands out of the way of that pitch, and then it's just nothing. And no, and the pitch was the exact same, but nobody pays attention to it, nobody notices it, and we wouldn't, Yankee fans, the Yankees, Orioles wouldn't have even been talking about it at all if he had just gotten his hands out of the way, and that had been it. Now, again, not blaming him. Of course, these pitches are coming in the 90-mile-an-hour range, so I get it. But with that said, like, in terms of, it's unfortunate he got hit, but it's not really the same. It's definitely not the same as what happened to Kjerstad, and it's not really even. I don't even think there's something you can hold the Orioles accountable for that, because it is just sort of standard practice of what happens in baseball. Um, so anyway, Kjerstad was the 10th Oriole that had been hit by the Yankee pitching this year. So it sort of had been hit. Kjerstad getting hit in the head was sort of the culmination and the climax of a lot of Oriole frustration about just getting hit consistently over and over again by Yankee pitching. So that is kind of that made things worse, right? That definitely made things worse from the Orioles' perspective. If Kjerstad was hit in the head by uh, Yankee pitchers, maybe yeah, I mean, it's a serious enough thing where maybe it sort of still does that same effect, but the context for it definitely, I think, made it even worse than it already was. So basically, yeah, when Clay Holmes, so again, I'm not holding Clay Holmes, I'm not mad at Clay Holmes, I'm not holding him accountable. But I sort of think about the situation with Clay Holmes, uh, and what happened as, like, now I don't drive in New York, but if you imagine a situation where, there's one driver in front of the other, and the driver behind ends up rear-ending the driver in front, right? If the driver in the front, I mean, not to excuse anything, right, that first driver may do, but if the driver in the if the driver who rear ends the guy in the front apologizes and says, I'm sorry," and then the guy who got hit, like, curses at them or something, right? it's not in that context, right? It's not really appropriate to be like, "What? You cursed at me? How dare you curse at me?" And sort of be that sort of angry and that sort of aggressive and that sort of hostile, given the context of, well, you made the mistake, even if it was unintentional. You kind of made the mistake. So we should allow some room for them to be angry and not in their correct mindset, and et cetera, right? Bounds of reason, but like there were bounds of reason in this game too, right? So I mean, that's just to say it doesn't excuse any action that the driver in the front or Brandon Hyde in that situation may take, but you should allow a little room for a little discontentment and even a little cursing, I would say. So, in this context, after the Orioles had this guy hit in the head, right, for the Yankees to get really, really angry and upset because Hyde said something to the pitcher and cursed at the pitcher. I think it's sort of a little much and a little extra for the Yankee fans and the Yankee dugout to start acting like, how dare you talk to our pitcher like that, right? Given the context of the situation and given that, like, even though it was unintentional, like, we should allow Brandon Hyde in that moment some grace and, not make that big a deal out of what he's doing. Clay Holmes, it didn't even seem like made a big deal out of what Brandon Hyde said. He just sort of turned around, well, I don't remember that exactly, but the I remember the second base umpire kind of interrupted Clay Holmes and sort of and then another player sort of calmed him down a little bit. But so I think it is a little ridiculous in that context for the Yankees to sort of get on Brandon Hyde about talking to Clay Holmes or saying something they didn't like to Clay Holmes. I think that's a little much and a little out of line given the context of the situation. But the brawl did sort of ensue, and fortunately everything did sort of resolve itself. The Orioles were not able to win that game, so the Orioles did end up losing 2 out of 3 in the series overall. um but yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, and I would imagine this has to be something that reemerges later in the season when the Orioles play the Yankees. So I definitely I'm not big on, I don't love brawls in this context, in the context of a baseball game. I certainly, don't like brawls and throwing at hitters in general, like, of course, bounds of reason, like in certain situations. I'm not saying it's never warranted, but I absolutely don't ever like intentionally throwing at somebody's head. I don't think anybody likes that. But yeah, so I'm not like cheering on brawls. I'm not cheering on you know, players fighting with each other. I don't want baseball to turn into hockey where not that I watch hockey, but where they are, fighting all the time. I think it's ridiculous. That 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 is sort of encouraged in hockey. And yeah, that the violence and the fighting is supported, cheered on, and yeah, encouraged by, well, I guess I don't know enough to exactly say this, but I'm imagining encouraged by the league to some extent. Um, I would imagine that fighting is part of the entertainment value of hockey, which I think is just sort of gross. And I don't want baseball to be like that, and I don't think it is like that. Brawls don't happen often enough. I think somebody might watch hockey with the hope that there might be a fight. I don't think somebody is going to watch 162 games or of baseball, or even a fraction of that in the hopes that there will be a brawl, because it's going to be extremely unlikely for that to happen. And it's just, so I get that these sorts of things can happen, but I'm just saying I think it might be a theme for the Oriole Yankee matchups going on into the future, even though I'm not saying, oh, we should be, we got to make sure we watch every Yankee Oriole game moving forward because things are about to catch fire, right? Like I'm not saying that. I mean, watch Oriole Yankee games because it's exciting and it's a division race and it's two good teams. But don't watch it anticipating for fights and hit by pitches and that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, this sort of even though it is not exactly the first half, the All-Star break usually symbolically sort of marks the first half. So I'm gonna give just a little reflection on the first half. I think the Orioles have had a lot of setbacks this year, which has been really, really unfortunate. Of course, the injuries, Tyler Wells, Kyle Bradish, John Means, amongst others. The Orioles have had setbacks in other ways, with Cedric Mullins perhaps not performing. So the Orioles have had a lot of good things happen too. We have Corbin Burns, we have Colton Cowser, who's had a good year overall, and there are been other bright spots. Bright spots. Jorge Mateo was a bright spot for a long time, for a large part of the season, right? So and Jordan Westberg, of course, can't forget Westberg here. And Henderson, and of course, I'm not giving a comprehensive list here, but with that said, the Orioles have had several setbacks. The Orioles have been swept multiple times this year. Um, and just the feeling of this first half, at least in my mind, is that the Orioles, sort of like we did last year, don't feel invincible like we once were. Now, of course, that feeling of invincibility isn't as important as actually being invincible. Uh, you know, the even though we felt invincible last year, the Rangers proved that we were not invincible. And this year, it's been much more, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a struggle and a bit of a grind overall for the Orioles team. Now, partly you can say we've dealt with stuff that should be sort of normal and expected. Every team suffers injuries and suffers setbacks. But it does sort of feel like without a Michael Elias intervention at the trade deadline, it does sort of feel like now it's not to say that we aren't, because we are, but it doesn't feel like the Orioles can legitimately contend for a World Series without Mike Elias intervening at the trade deadline and getting a substantial, I would say, amount of help for this Orioles team. Now, Tyler talked a bit about that, and the specifics of what the Orioles would need a little bit. We'll probably do that more in preparation for the trade deadline. But yeah, I think it is fair to say that this Oriole team probably needs some adjustment heading into the playoffs, and if we are going to compete for a World Series. Now, it feels a little frustrating in addition to this because the Orioles did sort of now I think the Orioles spent a reasonable amount of chips, quote unquote, prospects, not to dehumanize the players and the people that we traded away in the Corbin Burns trade, DL Hall, and Joey Ortiz. But the Orioles did sort of acquire Corbin Burns in an effort and in an attempt to win the World Series. And I think at this point, it's fair to say that things are not really on trajectory and on course in the way that we would have expected and would have hoped. I think that Mike Elias, when he got Corbin Burns, was sort of counting on Kyle Bradish to be the pitcher he was last year. And not only is he not that pitcher, he's not even pitching for us, and he won't be pitching for us. So it is a little difficult. I think it is a little, especially watching this team and this offense struggle like we have in the past couple of weeks. Now, I'm saying all this. The Orioles are still in first place in the American League East, so it's not like we're in fourth place and we're just a couple games over 500 or anything like that. We are still a very good team, but I think the challenges of this team have become apparent, and it is going to be a question for Hyde. How much sort of are we going to put into trying to win this year, given the current circumstances? And I think that's going to be a really, really tough and a really big decision for Brandon Hyde going into, because if we go for it this year, unless we're acquiring players that have multiple years on their contracts, in which case we would be, uh, giving up more prospects in exchange. I think there is legitimate questions about how much actually the Orioles should invest in trying to win the World Series this year. So definitely something, not denying that. We shouldn't leave this excellent team uh just in a position to not set them up for success. But there are legitimate questions about how much I think the Orioles should be willing and will be willing to give up in order to try to win this year, rather than sort of prolonging our quote unquote window. So yeah, it's kind of tough. The now I will say, I'm saying this, the bar last year was set very high by the Orioles. And we sort of are hoping that the Orioles make that bar. Um and yeah, I mean, we want to win a World Series, and if we don't win the World Series this year, it's not going to be a failure of a year, but it's definitely going to be a disappointment. If the Orioles make the ALCS and lose, we're going to be upset about that, and we're going to be frustrated, and we're not going to say, well, if you had asked me on day one if we were going to lose in the ALCS, I would have taken that year. I would not. I wouldn't have taken it that day. I wouldn't have really taken anything except the World Series, given that this team, uh, is good enough to win one. So, yeah, so it's been a little tough. I mean, at the beginning of the year, it sort of felt better. There were things that felt better. I probably am being uh Yeah, I probably am being a little unfair or driven to some extent by recency bias, just because the Orioles have, particularly struggled the past, I mean, second half of June and basically in July. I think it's more or less fair to say, but definitely in July. So there might be some recency bias with it, but overall, yeah, it does have sort of a different feeling. This Orioles team has a different feeling to it than the season we had last year. And I think overall it's in a more or less negative direction. So that's unfortunate. So really excited. Yeah, we have the All-Star game tonight. Really excited for it. Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman will be starting. We will see how things shake out. It might be kind of nice how things line up. Now, of course, uh, anybody could win the AL MVP, or if the All-Star Game MVP, I should clarify. Yeah, so it'd be, of course, be amazing if an Oriole won it. I think just looking at it, unless Adley or Gunnar Henderson get really big hits early in the game, and those scores sort of stand up, it's probably not likely that they will get the MVP. Maybe this should not be our focus. We just sort of want them to do well and hopefully get a couple hits and Adley do well behind the plate, not have any pass balls and stuff. But I think there is a possibility. if you're looking at someone like Westberg or you're looking at Anthony Santander, I could see Anthony Santander coming in to the game in the last couple innings, sort of because he's kind of the last guy um, in the outfield for the American League. And I could see him coming in and getting a big hit sort of toward the end of the game or a big home run. So, I mean, we'll see. There's a lot that has to happen. He's going to be facing very, very good pitching. So of course, there are a lot of question marks just overall with that. Paul Skeens is going to be the starting pitcher for the National League. So that is going to be difficult, and it's going to be especially difficult for Gunnar Henderson, who's going to have to see him. Uh, yeah, Gunnar Henderson and Adley is going to be difficult for them. Fortunately for them, Jordan Westberg and Santander won't have to face them. And then on the pitching side for the Orioles, Corbin Burns is going to be the American League starting pitcher. So, yeah, if he could go out there and give two good innings for the Orioles, that'd be amazing. So, yeah, and so we'll see. Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. Yeah, and just to sort of clarify here, Gunnar Henderson is going to be hitting second in the lineup after Stephen Kwan, and Adley Rutschman is going to be hitting eighth. So we will see what happens. It is possible that it's possible both of them get an at bat against Paul Skeens, but it's also very possible that that only Gunnar Henderson does and Adley will not. I think that's actually the likely scenario is that Adley will not get an at bat against Paul Skeens just because he's probably pitching one, maybe two innings. So we'll see. But yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. And I think anybody who is a baseball fan should be excited to see Gunnar Henderson against Paul Skeens. We did a while ago in spring training, we did see Paul Skeens against Jackson Holiday. Didn't go very well for Oriole fans. So it'll be interesting to see Gunnar Henderson hitting against him. Of course, this is a big deal for Paul Skeens being a rookie starting in the All-Star game. Pretty big and historic accomplishment for him. All right. So, with all that said, I do also want to note, in addition to everything here, we have the Major League Draft that is going on now. So, the draft is not complete. So, we will talk about the draft when it is finally over and completed in its entirety. So, we are aware it's happened. The Orioles have made plenty of selections, but we will do even though the recap will probably be molded in with these other with other discussion points. We will talk about the draft and what the Orioles did and their approach throughout. So anyway, yeah, feel free to follow the show. Please follow the show. Give us a 5-star rating and a review. We are also on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube. If you want, you can comment with any thoughts or analysis or disagreements that you have with anything I've said or any ideas that you have. If you feel like it, you can also email the show. You can get in touch with us. All you have to do is email us at thewarehousepod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at thewarehousepod. I'm sorry. You can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at the Warehouse Pod. Thank you to Bet Online for sponsoring the video. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and go O's.